Podcast 9 of a series of 10 link podcasts that look at the first phase of the German Revolution. This ninth podcast just develops a little bit more the notion of power sharing that we looked at in podcast 8. Okay, so just a brief recap. You've got Heber's government that has been appointed, in his view, legally and constitutionally, because it has been appointed by the Reichstag that was properly elected by all Germans of all social classes before World War I, and he has taken on the responsibility of forming a government provisionally, temporarily, until there can be a national election in which all Germans will vote for a constituent assembly, and that constituent assembly representing all Germans will decide on the future of Germany, what Germany will be at the end of the war. Should it be a republic? Should it be a constitutional monarchy, or whatever? Now, Heber's government was dominated by the MSPD as the largest political party, and remember, to try to take control of the workers and the working classes of Germany are increasingly becoming radicalized by the Soviets. He has made a deal to bring members of the USPD into his government, but only the right wing of the USPD were prepared to do that. Okay, so his government is dominated by the MSPD and the USPD. On the other hand, a separate form of government that represents only the workers of the capital city has formed, the so-called Executive Committee in Berlin. We looked at that in the previous podcast. Now, this Executive Committee is dominated by the left wing of the USPD, so a much more radical group of politicians, and also by the revolutionary shop stewards. Okay, we've already mentioned them then. They don't belong to any political party, but like the left wing of the USPD, they are pushing for an immediate socialising of Germany, and by that what we mean by socialising is introducing genuine socialist policies. Okay, they're not prepared to wait. They're not prepared to wait for a constituent assembly. So they have agreed to share power with Heber. So his holdover power is very, very tentative at this particular stage. So, as pointed out here, increasingly his hold on government was now therefore under threat. Okay, by the USPD, who want to socialise Germany. Okay, the type of policies that the extreme left, so the left wing of the USPD and the revolutionary shop stewards want, things such as to nationalise German industry, to completely remove privatisation, to abolish private control of industry. All industry should be owned by the workers. They want to break up the big farms, the landed estates, particularly in Prussia, owned by the Prussian nobility, the Junkers. They want to democratise organisations, institutions of the state, such as the civil service, the judiciary, and the army. What that basically means is, as we've said, these proud and solid organisations, the civil service that effectively implements and runs the country, the judiciary, in other words, a system of judges and lawyers and courts, and obviously the army itself. They're dominated by just the upper classes. Getting a job in any of those organisations, if you are from the lower classes, is almost impossible. So what they're pushing for is that should be abolished. That getting a top position in the army or the civil service or the judiciary should not just be the privileged right of the junker classes. It should be open to all, irrespective of your birth. So these left-wing groups that dominate the Executive Committee are pushing for immediate implementation of very, very left-wing policies. Now, at this point in time, they're not pushing for a complete abolition of the upper classes, but certainly they are pushing for very, very radical policies. Now, Heber, on the other hand, did not want to introduce this form of socialism until a constituent assembly has been formed. It is not to say that Hebert disagrees with these proposals because he is, after all, a socialist, but he is a man of principle who believes that all Germans should be invited to discuss and vote on this. And of course the Executive Committee only represents a tiny proportion of Germans, in other words the Germans based in Berlin. That is the problem. Hebert's proposals are much more moderate socialist policies. He feels Hebert feels that we do need to introduce socialism of some form, yes. I mean, if he didn't do that, then he'd obviously lose the backing of the working classes completely. But he's only prepared to introduce moderate socialist policies at this particular stage. So, for example, he introduced laws very quickly, an 8-hour working day, agricultural workers were given the right to form trade unions, agricultural workers, laws to provide work for demobilised soldiers, improvements in sickness insurance and unemployment benefits, and so on. So those are all definitely measures that are going to be popular with the working classes, but they are nowhere near as extreme as the type of measures that the Executive Committee of the Berlin Soviet is pushing for. Okay, and again, there's a useful quote from Carr. So that finishes this 9th podcast. One more to go. The 10th podcast looks at the very famous Hebert-Groener Pact. So move on to that one now. Thank you.